Hi, everyone, and welcome back to GLIAC Weekly, your update for all things GLIAC football with insider Tony Nicolette. I'm Chuck Bittner. I'm just here to ask questions. Tony, let's get to it. We had a pretty interesting slate of games in week 2 that we're going to run through. Not quite as interesting for the week coming up, but we had some really interesting results in the week 2 scoreboard. We've got a few box scores that we're going to dive into a few of these games in a little bit more detail, but let's run through some of the results. Michigan Tech only played 4 quarters this week. That's kind of disappointing. No overtime no overtime for the Huskies, but they do get the win.
The fans are probably disappointed that they didn't get free football for that third straight week. So, and you should have just said that you were here so you don't get fined, not so you ask questions. Tech kind of held serve. I've actually had some conversations with some folks that know that Hillsdale is not on a path to having a great season. It doesn't look like. So, Tech kind of, again, held serve a little bit up at home, which they needed to. But it wasn't probably the easiest thing either because, they moved the ball okay in the first half. But, Hillsdale ended up outgaining Tech by 100 yards in this game. So, that just goes to show you how difficult Hillsdale's having scoring the ball lately, and how Tech's defense, figured some stuff out when things got onto their side of the field.
Yeah. So a couple of those others we'll skip over and look at those in a little bit more detail. Findlay 42-30 final over Wayne State. Not really sure what to make of this game. That final score doesn't really tell us a lot about how that game played out.
No, it doesn't, because, when you see a 2-score game, you think, hey, Warriors, must have figured some stuff out. And I'm not going to say that they didn't, but this game was, it was 3-0 Wayne. They did hold the lead in the early going. And then somewhere in the third quarter, it was 42-3 Findlay. So now for Wayne to rattle off 28 unanswered or 27 unanswered from there, not so bad. And I think the good thing that may have come out of this game is, maybe Wayne figured out a quarterback. We'll talk a little bit more about that, coming up a little bit later. But that might be the thing that came out of that game, other than the misleading final score.
Yeah, big fourth quarter for them. Hopefully it's something that they can build on going forward. Not a bad debut for Roosevelt. I mean, we had this as them being the underdog, playing a top 5 Division III team in Whitewater, but this was a pretty competitive game for the Lakers.
Well, it really was. And the funny thing about this game is that, you see a final score, and again, you think, okay, Roosevelt acquitted themselves. I think they did more than that. Statistically in this game, they were basically even with Whitewater in terms of offense. But the thing to note here, Chuck, is that Whitewater only scored 10 points with their offense. There was a recovered fumble where when Roosevelt quarterback Carson Budke fumbled in his own end zone. And so basically they gifted Whitewater a defensive touchdown. And then after Roosevelt scored to make it 17-7, Whitewater ran the ensuing kickoff back for a touchdown. So it's like, you really look at what the offenses were doing in this game. They both did okay, but actually Roosevelt's offense actually outscored Whitewater's offense. Now, of course, that doesn't win the game for you, but this game was actually far more competitive than I think maybe a lot of people might have thought.
Yeah, unfortunately, the GLIAC 0-2 against the D3 heavyweights last week. We had Northern fallen by 2 touchdowns. Again, not an unexpected result. La Crosse is a very highly ranked D3 team as well, but not a good result for Northern Michigan.
Yeah, and La Crosse was kind of able to jump on them early, and over the course of the game, the Wildcats did try and claw their way back a little bit. Aiden Horde threw a couple of touchdown passes for them, but as a team, they're completing less than 50% of their passes and just not able to create a lot of balance offensively. It's going to be a problem when that defense has to do so much work week in and week out like we've seen.
Yeah. And we kind of had last week's game for Ferris as kind of their get-right game, which I think that was for them. I think this was probably a game that's going to give them a lot of confidence because it was a very similar type of game to last week against Lake Erie. I don't think any of us would confuse Ashland for Lake Erie. Ashland's a very respectable opponent, won 9 games a year ago, but this was all Bulldogs in this game.
Yeah, it really was. They jumped on them early, and this doesn't even tell the story. I mean, it was 36-3 at halftime. So, Coach Anise and the staff called the dogs off a little bit and got some reps at quarterback for a couple other guys as they try and figure out how they're going to move forward without Carson Gulker. Trinidad Chambliss had a nice game. Ended up winning GLIAC Offensive Player of the Week honors, on 23 of 30 for 286. He threw for a couple of scores, ran for a couple more. I think another thing to watch in this game is that Markel King led the team in rushing, but Cannon Katzer, the Washington State transfer, actually had double-digit touches in this game, and that's the second straight week that he's had that. So, they're really trying to see if they can figure out who's going to play that kind of, backfield mate role for Chambliss on a consistent basis. And Katzer seems to be getting a lot of reps in that regard.
All right. Well, a couple of these games we want to take a little bit of a closer look at, beginning with the battle for the axe. We talked about this last week. We joked about a little bit on Inside D2 Football. Neither of us quite had the courage to say we thought Northwood could win the game, but we definitely expected a tighter contest than we've seen the last couple of years. The Wood, they get the axe for the first time since 2017.
Yeah, and I think we were both had enough courage to say that they could win it. We just said that they wouldn't. We didn't say they would win it. And, gosh, man, and this was just I feel, the people who were there probably wish they all had axes themselves, because this has just had to be an awful game to watch. I mentioned this on Inside D2 Football back on Sunday. Saginaw only had 269 of total offense in this game, which doesn't sound all that bad until you realize that Northwood had only 169. So it's like, this is another example of a team scoring or, gaining 100 yards less than their opponent and finding a way to win. Like we were talking about the Tech game earlier. This one I'm just baffled by, Chuck. After, not that Winona State is a juggernaut by any means, but that's a quality win that Saginaw went and got on the road. And here they get into a rivalry game and they just can't figure out how to put any points on the board. They were 0 for 3 on field goals. They were 0 for 3 on fourth down. It's just like, golly. And then 41 net yards rushing as a team. I'm just baffled by that. When you look at Terrence Brown and what he can normally do, and then the fact that Mason McKenzie's a very capable runner, if not prolific one, when you think of all the talent that they've got to be able to run the ball, the fact that Saginaw Valley couldn't do it it's really hard to get my head around. But then I say that, and the team that won the damn game only had -7 yards. So it's like it's the bizarro world in Midland this past weekend, dude. I don't know what else to think about it. This is just unbelievable.
Not a very pretty game, but Northwood won't care about anything that you just had to say about it.
They sure won't.
When you haven't beaten your rival, it's been kind of a one-sided series. A lot of those games, some of them close, some of them not so close. None that's going to matter to them. Big win for Northwood. Could be the kind of thing that really sets them on their way for the rest of their GMAC schedule later this year.
GMAC better keep an eye on them.
All right. This one, I think, played out kind of the way we thought it would. We had this pegged as a really tough road trip for Davenport. They grind out a tough win, got a halftime lead, had to make it hold up, but they were able to do it down in Bowie.
Yeah, and that's kind of against some of these teams where Davenport might face a challenge, but they're still the team that should win. That kind of seems to be their MO, as they jump on them just enough early, and then they kind of cling to it for the second half, and that's exactly the model that they used here. I think the only thing that I was glad to see Preston Smith have a better game. I think he only caught he had a really, really funny stat line in game one against Thomas More. It was only 3 catches for 9 yards or something goofy like that. So for him to go 4 for 76 and grab a tutty, I thought was good. I was a little baffled at how ineffective Davenport was running the ball. Myron Harris didn't have a good game. Both DeJuan Mathis and Michael Horwell had plenty of snaps, and they threw the ball a little bit, but they also had some carries, and they weren't very effective running the ball. And I think that's something that I'm really interested to see, because they ran the ball well in week one. And that's typically what, for as much as Spark likes to throw the ball a little bit, he likes to be able to run it and to use quarterbacks to run when he can. I'm interested to see what they do this week against Central Missouri. And we'll talk about that here later in the show. But that's the thing that stood out to me, was the job that Bowie State did stopping Davenport's run game. I just didn't see that coming, and I figured this might be only a 17-14 or a 24-14 score, but Davenport would have 2 1/4, 250 on the ground, and that did not happen in this one. They weren't even close to that.
Yeah, I think I expected a little bit more from the Davenport offense, but I think this is a great win for Davenport. I said it last week. Bowie is a very difficult place to play. They defend the home turf really well, and they do how to play some defense. I think it's a great win going on the road for the Panthers. Our only top 25 matchup last week is in terms of the D2football.com top 25. We had the Lakers going down to Pueblo. Very interesting contest here, Tony. They had a nice lead at the half, but outscored by the Thunderwolves in the second half. It actually came down to a pretty dramatic finish there in the Thunderbolt.
Yeah, it was sort of dramatic. I mean, from the standpoint that, Pueblo got that late touchdown, but there were only 4 seconds left in the game when they got it. So the idea that they were going to somehow, cover an onside kick and then run a single play that was going to net them some points to win it, seemed highly unlikely. But if you saw the sequence that led up to that, then there was quite a bit of drama in there. I mean, Pueblo had a field goal with 5-ish minutes or so to go that got called back for an illegal formation, and then they missed after they moved them 5 yards back. So it could have been closer. Late in the game, prior to I think it was prior to the touchdown that made it 24-14. Grand Valley was moving the ball. It already was 24-14. Grand Valley was trying to burn some clock and get a first down, and they fumbled. And the Pueblo defender picked it up, was running it back, bobbing, weaving all over the place, gets inside the 10 and even inside the 5, and one of Grand Valley's receivers came up from behind him and stripped it and then recovered it, giving Grand Valley a first down deep in their own end. So, Pueblo was that close to really making this even dicier for Grand Valley than it was. Now, with all the fourth quarter theatrics aside, this game was really Grand Valley did a great job early of establishing the run. They probably didn't run as well as they would have liked to game long, but they still did a good job of it in total. I mean, they were well over 200 yards rushing for the game. And Pueblo's got a pretty solid defensive front. I mean, they might be a little undersized, but they play well. They play stout. And I think I've actually got a chance to watch the game again, too, after not seeing it on the sidelines. And I think the couple things that I noticed in particular was Grand Valley seemed to be just mistake-laden. I mean, you just don't see them have 20 penalty games like they did in this one. And it was amazing how often those penalties came on plays that would have put them in real great momentum sets in terms of drives. I mean, they were almost always coming either just around midfield or just into the plus territory for them. And one of them even came in the red zone where, now you've got 1st and 10 inside the 20, or you've got 1st and 10 in plus territory. And now all of a sudden you're backed up behind the sticks because of illegal man downfield. That got called a ton. And I kept looking at it, and I kept thinking to myself, boy, he's downfield. He's not supposed to be. He's somebody with a 60 or a 50 or a 70 number. And those guys aren't supposed to be that far downfield. So there's a lot of stuff that Grand Valley is going to have to clean up as they move through the schedule to be able to avoid some of those fourth quarter situations. But I was impressed with Grand Valley's ability to run the ball again against a quality opponent. I also think that the combination of Devin Larson and Reggie Retzlaff are going to be a real problem for the rest of the RMAC. I don't know if there were times where I was surprised, actually. There were times where Retzlaff was probably open more often than Nelson actually hit him. So if Nelson's accuracy gets dialed in over the course of the season, they're going to be even more potent than they already were. But they're both big, strong kids. There were situations where Nelson's ability to keep the play alive really made a difference. And Retzlaff isn't a burner, but he just finds a way to outfight you, or he finds a way to body you to get some space. And if Larson finds them, it's big plays. And he had, I think, at least 3 catches in this game of over 40 yards. So they're going to be a handful in that RMAC, that's for sure.
I agree. It's slightly unfortunate for them. The CSU Pueblo was 25 coming into that weekend. With the loss, they fell out of the top 25. I feel it's probably a little bit of a disservice to them, but I think we'll probably see them back in there.
I had them higher than that in my poll, and they didn't fall out of my poll for what it's worth. Seeing them firsthand, I was like, okay, they're still better than some of the other teams that were knocking on the door of the top 25, at least in my opinion. So
yeah, I think we'll probably see them back in there in pretty short order. So we wanted to make sure we shared this. We put that up there on Inside D2 on Sunday nights. Tony, you actually were there in the Thunder Bowl. A beautiful evening there. Got to catch up with our friend AC as well. A few reactions from your trip.
Yeah, no, it's a nice facility. They maintain it well. You can tell that they keep actually adding to it. You know, they put a new weight room in, and I think a new football building down at the one end where the team comes out. Um, the facilities and just in general for, you know, especially for the Division II level, where we see kind of a very wide swath of some that are really, really new, nice and new, and some that are kind of old and a little high schooly. This one is just a really great facility. And I was actually asking the folks too, because they've got the hashes marked for high school. And I don't know how much it gets used for high school, but I think that facility actually gets used a fair amount. And they do a nice job of taking care of it. So, I mean, you can't see it real well, but that picture that I've got there, if you look far enough into the distance and into the clouds, you actually can make out some mountain outlines. And so it's just, you know, it's a unique place within the D2 landscape, in that it's not urban, it's not, but it's just, I don't know, it's hard scrapple around it. It's just there's just a visual that you get that you just don't see in many other places around the country. And so just to even see it and be like that, be there in that environment was really great. And they put in a good crowd in there. I think they had over 8,000. And it was just one of the most gorgeous nights ever. Like I didn't sit in the press box. I'm usually a press box guy because I like to watch things develop. And I was on the sidelines for basically the whole game because it was just such a beautiful evening there. So yeah, it was a really good time. I appreciate the folks at Pueblo for having me, and Ben Greenberg and his staff do a nice job. So it was a good time.
Awesome. Well, let's start looking ahead. Well, actually, we'll do that in a minute. I do want to make sure we have an opportunity to do some player acknowledgments. The players of the week from the GLIAC. Let's run through those and talk about some of the performances they had.
Yeah, well, we talked about Trinidad already. His name will appear on this list, I'm sure, again before the season's over. Ferris quarterbacks tend to find their way onto these things on a pretty regular basis. So, but we kind of hit on his numbers already. But you know, when we talk about Tech getting a second straight win, you know, Hunter Bleichel had a really nice game and kind of kept, you know, Hillsdale at bay, even though they moved the ball a little bit better than Tech did. So, I mean, he had 7 tackles, 2 of them for loss, added a sack, forced a fumble. I mean, he had a pretty big game and came up huge when the Huskies needed him most. And then out there in Pueblo, Trace Hergich for Grand Valley did a real good job on punting in. There were actually a few times where the crowd kind of oohed and ahed at a couple of the ones that he boomed off, and then kind of did the same thing when he would get one that would basically bounce left and go out of bounds at about the 5-yard line. So he had a huge impact on field position in that game. So that this plaudit for Player of the Week was definitely well-deserved on his part as well.
All right. And a few additional shout outs that you wanted to mention from.
Yeah, I did. You know, I mean, you know, Eli Rouse is a freshman at Northern Michigan, but he ripped off a 77-yarder in that game against La Crosse. Ended up with a $137 on 15 carries as a result. So he had a nice game establishing the run for Northern in that game. And they actually ran for 269. I mean, they actually had a good game running the ball against La Crosse. They just got to see if they can start putting some stuff together to be able to finish some more drives and see if they can't put some more points on the board. And then, you know, I also wanted to highlight Wayne State there on the right. This slide is a Witt slide, by the way, because Witt loves anything that includes all of the teams in the GLIAC that have green in their colors. So don't ask me why. You know, it's just something that he always points out. But at any rate, Champ Edwards is the quarterback there for Wayne, and he didn't get the start in this game, but he came in really early, and on his first snap, his first carry, he ripped off a 45-yarder on a zone read that set Wayne up for that 3-0 lead that we talked about earlier. But he ended up having a really nice game for the Warriors. I mean, he threw for a couple of touchdowns. He wasn't real high on the completion percentage, but, you know, he didn't throw any picks. And he had 146 yards on the ground and another touchdown. So he really had a solid game for what basically equates to his first game really playing in any consequence for Wayne. So you're kind of wondering if you're going to see more of him moving forward for the Warriors. But if they can get that position at least figured out, hopefully they'll continue to be improving as far as their competitive level over the course of the rest of the season. And then in the middle there is Keontae Nixon for Roosevelt. And I wanted to highlight them a little bit because we are going to talk about them in one of our games coming up this week. But, you know, he had 123 yards receiving, I think, in that game for Roosevelt. But he also had an 84-yard touchdown that got them on the board. And that's their first their first touchdown as a member of the GLIAC. So, I mean, that's certainly noteworthy in and of itself. But, yeah, he ended up with 123 yards on 4 grabs and that touchdown. And again, we talked about Roosevelt, and this actually can segue us into, I think, their game ahead look is the first one here next. I mean, when they play Valparaiso this week, they played well against Whitewater. Whitewater had only 8 possessions in this game, so Roosevelt's defense actually played pretty well. I think 7 of those drives maybe ended on a Roosevelt side of the field, but they still had to punt from distance. They had a couple of missed field goals, and they actually turned it over on downs a couple of times. So, Roosevelt's D gave up some yards, but they still found a way to be competitive. And then, like I say, the offense actually outscored Whitewater's offense. So when we look at them playing Valparaiso next week, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Chuck.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to that. Here is our schedule. Unfortunately, we have some games here that just aren't really all that mentionable. So we're going to skip over that. Let's talk about a couple that we are interested in. So here is kind of your comparison with Roosevelt and Valpo.
Sorry, the segue was in my head, and I didn't really translate it to you very well. So sorry about that, but hopefully the viewers will bear with us. But yeah, I don't know. I got done watching this game, and I didn't get to see all of it, but I saw enough of it where I'm sitting there watching it going, okay, I'm thinking Whitewater is the number 3 team in D2. And those Wisconsin teams like La Crosse, like Whitewater, that Wisconsin league, for those who don't know, is a highly competitive Division III league. And one of the reasons it is so competitive is because in the state of Wisconsin, they basically only allow football scholarships to be given by Wisconsin-Madison. So it's like there is no Division II football anywhere in Wisconsin. And so it's like you're either going to go out of state or you're good enough to go to Madison, or maybe you stay home and play for one of the directional schools in Wisconsin. And so those clubs are really, really good. And again, Whitewater's been a high-level program within D3 for a lot of years. So for Roosevelt to play that solid a game against them, I look at them going against Valparaiso, and I think to myself, okay, this is a winnable game for these guys. I mean, Valpo's 2 losses came to other FCS teams. The one win that they have was against Indiana Wesleyan last week. They had to kick a 4th-quarter field goal late to get a win. And, oh, by the way, Indiana Wesleyan, it was in the same conference that Roosevelt was in last year. So I'm looking at this going, geez, oh, Pete's, Valpo, okay, their numbers might be a little skewed by being a non-scholarship D1, playing, full Scally D1 schools, 63 Scallies at the FCS level. Nevertheless, Roosevelt's got dudes who are getting some dough. So, I mean, it's like, I'm looking at this going, hey, Chase Budke is or Carson Budke, excuse me, is an experienced starter for those guys. They ran the ball a little bit ineffectively last week, but they made up for it by being consistent in the passing game. He completed a high percentage of his passes. I don't know. I just look at this and I look at a defense that for Valpo given up as many yards as they are, and I just think this could be an interesting game for the Lakers, possibly getting their first win after joining the GLIAC.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a winnable game. It'll be interesting to see what the result of that one is. Next game we want to spotlight. 2 teams are going to have to play with a sense of urgency this week. We have Saginaw coming off the tough loss against Northwood. Truman, kind of an uncharacteristic 0-2. Got to think the Bulldogs are really hungry to get a win on the board here.
Oh, for sure. And I think the desperation level was part of why we picked this game, Chuck. And I think desperation maybe is maybe overstating it, but I don't think it is. Again, I mean, so. Truman's been on the cusp of the playoffs the last several years, and I think we talked about this. I think Whit and I may have talked about it, or actually we might have talked about this on Inside D2 Football, that it just kind of stinks that Truman-Indianapolis game in the GLDC the last several years has basically been the de facto conference championship game, and they played it in week 2. So it's like, why is it so early in the year? But it's what it is. And so now Truman's sitting here at 0-2 after playing the team that'll likely win their own conference, and then having lost in week 1 to the team that's likely going to win the GMAC. So this is a tough get for them, and they got to go on the road to play Saginaw, who's obviously going to come in pretty ticked after losing a rivalry game. And again, we've talked about Saginaw Valley as a team that they really feel like their depth this year is better than it's ever been. Yeah, they're starting a freshman at quarterback, but he got a couple games in last year and stayed under the 3 games so he could keep the year. And their defense is loaded with dudes. They're only giving up 14 points a game, as you see. In fact, it's like I don't know. I'm baffled by the fact that they lost that game last week. I still can't figure out how that happened. I think I got that wrong. I think it's only 12 points a game. But this is desperation time for them, Chuck, because they got to play Indianapolis after this. They still have their full slate of GLIAC. They still have their full slate of GLIAC games, so they're going to have to play Grand Valley, Ferris. They haven't been able to beat Davenport in a couple of years. I'm looking at this going, geez, oh Pete, if they thought that they were going to be a playoff team, they don't have any margin for error from here on out, because the idea that they're going to win out, boy, that seems like a reach based on what we saw last Saturday.
For sure. And I agree with you. I think it's why on both sides the desperation factor is very interesting, very compelling here.
Yeah.
A lot of interest in this one, too. Now, I was going to be interested in this even before the results of last week. You have a ranked MIAA team coming to Michigan to play a team that's been very hot the last couple of years, a very solid Davenport team. I think this maybe even takes on a little bit more interest when we look at how Central Missouri's defense was just totally outclassed in their loss last week.
Yeah, well, and the thing of it is, though, I mean, okay, they gave up 57 last week, but, even against the not very good team the week before, they still gave up, 20-some. So I'm like, yeah, maybe that defense just isn't that good. And, I mean, Davenport, maybe this is a get-right game for their ground attack. I mean, 214 yards a game that Central Missouri's given up. I mean, especially when you think about it through the lens of they're a team that normally is going to put so much pressure on you because they score so much that teams are going to have to throw against them, and they're still giving up a couple hundred yards on the ground. I don't know. I'm not saying that Davenport's going to be able to get right, so to speak, in this game, but when you look at a defense that's given up that much in the way of yardage, you got to figure that Davenport's going to at least have some success and be able to put some kind of points on the board. And I think this game intrigues the daylights out of me, because having lived in the GLIAC as long as we have, we see teams after they play certain teams usually play beat up the next week. So there's always this kind of degradation of what you're able to do after you play Ferris or Grand Valley. And the last couple of years, teams have played beat up after they play Davenport, because Davenport is very physical defensively. And so I'm curious to see if their level of physicality measures up to what we expect for that week in, week out that we normally see in the MIAA. And can they end up being competitive in this game? So, there's part of me that really thinks that, hey, if this is within a score at halftime, all bets are off, man. I mean, if they're able to get Zabrowski and frustrate him a little bit and basically take away any kind of ground attack that Central Missouri tries to establish, this game could really be interesting, especially if Central Missouri's defense is as porous as we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think Central Oklahoma, their opponent last week, showed some explosiveness that we didn't really know they had.
Right.
And they were very impressive, but there were some really bad breakdowns in that Central Missouri defense. There's a lot of fundamentals that they had some breakdowns on. So I think that creates some opportunities for Davenport. And on the other side of the ball, I mean, yeah, the Mules got their yards. Zabrowski got his touchdowns, but he was also sacked 6 times.
Yeah,
in that game.
Exactly. And guys like Austin Allworld and Jamonte Peck, they can play. Just like I say, Davenport's defensive front is legit. And you nailed it, dude. When we were watching some of those clips, the lack of wasn't even just the lack of fits in some of the Central Oklahoma run games that we saw, is the tackling. It was just like, It's like they weren't even, I don't know. It was very strange. It just, I don't know if the kids weren't ready or if they didn't have I'm still, as I think about some of those highlights in my head, I'm still sitting there trying to think to myself, I wonder what was going on in that game. Because you just don't see at this level of football defenses that seem that out of position or that unwilling to get in there and make a hit and get a tackle done. I don't know. It was very strange.
Yeah. So obviously Davenport is a very different team to prepare for than the explosiveness we saw from Central Oklahoma. But nonetheless, certainly makes this matchup very, very interesting. Can't wait to see how that plays out. Well, that's your week 3 schedule. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of other really mentionable games. I think we've got a couple of Division III games in there.
I think
But three of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're not quite into conference play yet, but that's coming up soon. So that is your week 3 preview. Tony, before we close this out, any final remarks heading into the third official week, actually the 4th week of the season?
Yeah, no, I mean, you nailed it. This week's schedule isn't all that intriguing from the standpoint that they're games that count but don't count, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, Roosevelt obviously playing an FCS team. You know, Grand Valley, Northern, and Tech are all playing D3 teams. So, yeah, the schedule this week just is not as enticing as it could be, but it's coming, guys. It's coming. Week 4 is going to be a little bit better, and then the GLIAC stuff starts. So it's going to get a lot of fun from there. But yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have a good day on Saturday, Chuck. I'm going over to Davenport to see them play Central Missouri. Ryan Thompson and his staff have already got me hooked up. I was on his list as soon as I saw this game get published back in the spring. I'm like, dude, I'm coming to that one. And then I'll probably sneak out and see Grand Valley play Wisconsin lacrosse Saturday night. So yeah, so it'll be a good day of Saturday football for me, and then we'll get to talk all about it on Sunday. So it'll be fun.
We'll be here for you on Sunday night for Inside D2 Football. Of course, we'll be back next week to recap anything exciting that does happen this week. I'm sure there'll be a few surprises probably. We'll be here to talk about that and get you ready for the week 4 schedule as well. He's Tony Nicolette. I'm Chuck Butner. We'll see you next week and catch us Sunday night on Inside D2 Football.